So I'm here with my dear friend Christopher Bollyn, who is here in Holland. We did a sort of dual presentation yesterday on a 9/11 event, where we did a talk on. I did a talk on the flight technical operational aspects, and Christopher addressed the who, what, why questions about 9/11, and also this excellent presentation you addressed the facts. The ongoing implications of 9/11, that this is an ongoing event. So with the current events, what we're seeing happening today, evolving with the Notre Dame and all these wars, regime change, and now in Sri Lanka again, that this is all the consequences in a certain way of what happened on 9/11. So I think that's very important as a starting point, to address that, why it's so important to keep talking about 9/11, because this was sort of the starting point of all these things which are happening today in the world, and then you can say it's a conspiracy. Well, it is a sort of conspiracy, but therefore it's so important to keep talking about 9/11, because that's where it all started. So
right.
Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Right. Yeah, well, September 11th, 9/11, is the seminal event.
Just cut it out later on.
Yeah, we're at an airport.
Yes.
Yeah, so we'll cut that
You
part
can
out.
start your sentence all over.
Yeah.
911 is the seminal
Yeah.
event.
Well, thank you. September 11th is the seminal event of our time. It is the event that brought us the war on terror, the global war on terror, which, as we see from the yesterday's events in the bombings in Sri Lanka, as you said, it's a global war on terror. And what they've done is in the last few months is that they've changed their tactic into attacking religious institutions, churches, synagogues, mosques, taking it to a new level. And the murder of 290 people in Sri Lanka yesterday was just atrocious on Easter Sunday. But all of these acts of terror, these atrocities, are coming from the same source. And that source is the 9/11 event itself. So understanding who is behind September 11th, who is behind the deception that was foisted upon us about 9/11 and brought us the war on terror, understanding who's behind the dual fraud, 9/11 on one side, the war on terror on the other. It's all connected. It's all the same people. It's all the same group that is bringing us the terror attacks that we're seeing around the world today, and 9/11. So it's essential that in order to understand the times we're living in, and in order to understand the problem, we need to understand who did 9/11 and why it was done. So it's not something that happened 17 years ago and we can say that's old, that's history, we can walk away from it. No, because that is the cornerstone, that is the keystone of what we're experiencing today. 9/11 was done in order to bring us the war on terror. And these events that are happening in Sri Lanka and in Paris and in Pittsburgh and Christchurch, these are all part of the same thing.
Yeah, and it's a global war on terror, which you see. It's a global war of terror, if you look at it from another way. But it gives this feeling of the loss of sense of safety worldwide. It's everywhere. But you also addressed in your presentation yesterday who created these sort of Frankenstein proxy terror groups in order to use these groups to commit these violent acts. Starting at 9/11, it's clear that the official narrative is absolutely inconsistent and from different angles absurd, really. And it's blamed again on another group of Muslims to create this division in society, the fear and the polarity what's now being done on a religious level. But so that therefore it's such an important thing in order not to fall for it as well. We see people they turning to religion also for their sense of safety, because people are living more in fear of these attacks due to this fear. But then because we're gearing up for a sort of engineered clash of civilization with this sort of worldwide Gladio network, which creates this strategy of tension worldwide. So therefore also your quote, what you mentioned, who's behind 9/11, who did 9/11, the powers behind it, they control the media. So therefore these governments are also controlled by the same entity. It's the same entity, it's the same alliance. It's not one group. It's not. That's what people would like us to focus on, one group, the Jews or the Muslims, or to feed this division. But this controlling entity in the dark, that's why 9/11 is such a crucial point, which you address.
Because the what we can deduce from the cover-up of 9/11, deception of 9/11, is that because the government and the media, the mainstream media, because these two institutions maintain the deception. They are the ones, the U.S. government and the media are the two entities that do not investigate 9/11, do not ask questions about 9/11, do not raise any investigation. There was no criminal investigation of 9/11, and the mainstream media has completely failed to do any investigation of its own to see if the government story is correct or not. So we can deduce that the powers behind the government and behind the media are in fact the people who are behind 9/11. Because the only people who are benefiting from the cover-up and the deception are the real culprits of 9/11, the people who did it. So that's a very serious political predicament to be in. But we have to understand that is the problem. The government and the media are in cahoots. They're working with the people who did 9/11. And now we have, 17 and a half years later, we have ongoing wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and new wars cropping up across the region, and no resistance to it. And the fact that there's no resistance is because most people do not understand the fraud behind 9/11 and the war on terror. They think the war on terror is a good thing. And these events that we see happening, around the world increase the fear level of the population and get them to support the war agenda. So it's all a giant psyop against the population.
Yes, and it's escalating at the same time. We see a sort of escalation towards in this agenda, in this war on terror, towards this clash of civilization, in the sense that we are more censored. Anti-Zionism or criticism about Zionism is now akin to anti-Semitism by law. So the freedoms are more and more taken away, even more. And at the same time, you see an escalation of the violence and the civil unrest at the same time. In France, it's close to a sort of civil war situation with the yellow vest and other aspects. What's happening in France now? And then the ritual burning of the Notre Dame, which serves again this feeds this engineered clash of different groups who react on it but don't see the causes.
And in America, you're seeing now open hostility against Muslims being expressed by, people in government, because we have a new congresswoman from Minnesota, a Somali-born woman who's a Muslim, who's speaking out about the power of the Israeli lobby and raising questions about September 11th to some degree, and she's being attacked by the president and other people in a way that is very uncivil, and she feels threatened. I suppose that's with good reason, because it's like the gloves are coming off in the discourse about religions in America. It's becoming very tense, and there's always the danger of violence. And Muslims, of course, are a minority population in the United States, and they're feeling, I think they're feeling a bit threatened. But she's the only woman in Congress who's raising questions about 9/11. She says, some people did something. That's nothing wrong with that. But for saying that, Senator or Congresswoman Omar was attacked. And we need that discussion. We need to talk about who did 9/11, why it was done. And it's the fault that the government has not done it. Donald Trump said he would tell us who took down the twin towers when he became president, but he hasn't done it.
No. And then here in Europe you have these European political arenas where you have this, for instance in Holland you have this new political forum for democracy, but these people talk about the symptoms, which is Islam, and they talk about immigration, which mass immigration is a serious problem in Europe, but they address this, which is a symptom. They never talk about Zionism, like what you see in the UK, Nigel Farage. Here you have the Forum of Democracy, which supports Israel, and so that is being avoided. So they focus on the symptoms, which also feeds this division in society, and sort of feeds also this sort of engineered clash of civilizations between religions, Muslim, non-Muslims. So therefore it's so important to see all these events not as isolated events. These wars are not spontaneous, isolated things. These wars don't start from just spontaneous. So the entity which is instigating these events, instigating these agendas, it's the same entity. That's important for people to understand. It goes way back, of course, before 9/11.
Yes.
9/11 gives them sort of the legitimacy to perform this ongoing war of terror. So
and the thing is that the war on terror doctrine was rolled out onto the world stage in Jerusalem in 1979, July. And that's when Netanyahu and his father and Menachem Begin began this propaganda offensive to initiate and to indoctrinate the media and the politicians. There were something like 800 politicians there and media heads into that the new focus would be on terrorism. No longer talking about human rights or this, but focusing on terrorism. And it's interesting, at the time, at this conference, the Jerusalem conference in July 1979, they tried to pin the tail for all terrorism on the Soviet Union. Now, of course, they've shifted focus. It's not the Soviet Union who's behind terrorism, global terrorism, but it's Islam. And it's in the first 17 years after 9/11, Islam was attacked. Islamic countries were attacked, but they created these entities to be the boogeyman, who were masquerading as Islam, like Al-Qaeda. What happened is that the Americans, with Charlie Wilson, Congressman Charlie Wilson from Texas, they began creating and funding a radical anti-Western Islamic group in Pakistan to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. And Saudi Arabia and the United States put up the money, and Israeli military intelligence, at the time under Ehud Barak, sent weapons from the battlefield in Lebanon, and they sent Arabic-speaking instructors to teach these Afghan Arabs in the art of terrorism. Taught them how to make bicycle bombs and car bombs. What the Israelis had been doing in Lebanon for 4 years. The Israelis had a group in Lebanon from 1979 till 1983 in which they did car bombs and truck bombs all over the country, fueling this factional conflict, the civil war in Lebanon, to break the country into pieces. And of course, the Israeli hope was that they would take the southern part of Lebanon up to the river Litani. But what happened with this group that they cultivated in Pakistan to fight the Mujahideen that they created, in 1994, the Arab-speaking Afghan Arabs, they became Al-Qaeda. And the Pashtun, the Afghans, became Taliban. And so this is like a big scene, a big play in which the bad characters are created, and then the good characters are created, and we attack the bad characters wherever they are. And what this is like moving the boogeyman around the board, and then attacking where the boogeyman is.
Carpet bombing the area.
Carpet bombing, like so. Then 2017, 2 years ago, the United States and 67 allies, including Holland and many other countries, they attacked 2 large Arab cities, one in Syria, Raqqa, and one in Iraq, Mosul, the second biggest city in Iraq, and they pounded it all summer long, like what happened to Aleppo earlier. And they reduced these populations, they forced the people out, they ethnically cleansed Sunni Arabs to a large degree. And they said that we're attacking these cities because ISIS is there. Or they say ISIS is in the Palestinian refugee camp near Damascus, and so they pounded the camp. Or the Syrians pounded the camp. But by moving this boogeyman around, this becomes a war of terror. Mm-hmm. You're using terror as your tool to wage war and destroy the Middle East. And what they're doing is that they're basically fragmenting the Middle East in the same way they fragmented Yugoslavia.
Exactly.
Breaking it up along ethnic lines, redrawing the map, and weakening the Arab states, the nation states. And they intend to weaken all of them. So Saudi Arabia, take note. Every country in the region is on the chopping block.
Yes, and I mean you talked also about how ISIS was created in Iraq, in Raqqa.
Yeah, in Buqa.
In Buqa prison.
Yeah.
And then what you see now, for instance, with the Notre Dame, that you see spokesmen from ISIS saying that this is a punishment, or they make it a sort of redemption. What is it? Punishment?
Divine retribution.
Yeah, retribution.
Punishment.
And at the same time, the rabbi is declaring the same.
Yeah.
So they speak for the same channel.
That's very interesting. Site Intelligence, an Israeli propaganda intelligence website based in Maryland, put up shortly after the fire in Notre Dame, this piece in which they said that the Arabs are in the Muslim group associated with ISIS was celebrating and they were happy about the events of Notre Dame. And this is coming to us from the Israelis, from an Israeli intelligence propaganda website called Site Intelligence Group. It's an Iraqi Jewish woman named Rita Katz, based in Bethesda, Maryland. And she provides to the U.S. media and to the U.S. government this intelligence on what the ISIS is doing. And as she was providing this to the public and to the media, that the Arabs and the ISIS is jubilant about the attacks on Notre Dame, in the West Bank, an Israeli rabbi was saying the exact same thing. He was saying what these ISIS people were supposedly saying, that is that the destruction of the Notre Dame cathedral was divine justice for some burning of the Talmud that happened in Paris in the 13th century, something like that.
Yeah.
So as you said, but of course, Site Intelligence Group didn't tell us that. They didn't tell us that the Israeli rabbi is jubilant about the destruction of Notre Dame, because what the Israeli intelligence wants you to think is that the ISIS and the Arabs and the Muslims are waging war against the West. Now we have no evidence at this point, almost a week later, we have no evidence that Muslims were in any way involved in the burning at Notre Dame, nor for that matter in the massacres that occurred yesterday in Sri Lanka. There is a report though that one of the suicide bombers was seen in the hotel, in the breakfast room, and a manager of the hotel said that we know this man was Muhammad somebody, and that he came in the night before, and that he apparently said that he saw this suicide bomber blow up. But I mean, that would be very hard to see. How would you, if there's a group of people standing there and a bomb goes off, you'd have to be very, very quick to say, that's the bomb went off from him. If he's wearing it under his coat. I mean, these bombings yesterday in Sri Lanka, they're so coordinated, they're so well prepared, they were so lethal. And here again, we have the same thing. Muslims are being blamed, but the question, why would this radical Muslim group attack Christians in Sri Lanka on Easter Sunday? It makes no sense.
It doesn't.
It makes no sense. So there seems to be, the real target of this is the world audience. Because it's like a play. The whole thing is like a Schauspiel. It's like a performance, and we are the audience, and so we're meant to witness a spectacle and draw the conclusions that they want us to draw. And in order for us to draw the right conclusions, they kind of remind us who did this, and that's the purpose. I mean, for example, the police chief in Sri Lanka, 10 days before the bombing on Easter Sunday, he got a warning from a foreign intelligence agency that something would happen in churches on the Easter Sunday. But this foreign intelligence agency that provided this information to the chief of police in Sri Lanka is not identified.
No. Who is that?
Who is that? Who is this foreign entity who knew all about this attack, and somehow it didn't get to the prime minister?
And a source. Anonymous sources.
Yeah, the source. Well, what are the sources of the information?
Who is that? But it goes all the way back to 9/11, where Muslims were blamed, who were not involved in it. They were not 19 hijackers, clearly. They were blamed, so it's ongoing, and the damage is done when it's published in the newspapers or in the news that possibly Muslim extremists, it re-triggers this trauma of 9/11 continuously by one sentence, or you have this, in this opposition, people from controlled opposition, they Twitter, look how these Muslims react to Notre Dame with the smileys and their things. So by putting that out, they feed that ongoing triggering, that 9/11 trauma. Right. Because it's traumatic. This is horrific, of course, every time. Right. But by only putting it, by saying possibly Muslims, that's enough. That already feeds it.
That's right. Because people are already primed. They have these ideas in their head, and as you say, each event that happens is just like throwing another log on the fire. The fire is burning, and why are they doing this? Why is Israel and the Zionist intelligence sources? Why are they throwing more fuel on this fire? Because they want that the Western audiences, the Western populations, have grave, serious doubts about Islam and are afraid of Islam. And where is that going to go? If they cultivate this fear, they mean to take us into a war, a real clash of civilizations with Islam. And that's why it has to be resisted by our intellect, and we have to understand that we're being played, we're being deceived, we're being fooled. Because if we allow this deception to go on, if we don't stop it, if we know that it's a deception and we allow it, then we're enabling evil. We're enabling the culprits of 9/11 to further their agenda. And their agenda is war. And it's the last thing that we want or we need.
And we all want the same thing in a way. We're put up against each other, but the people don't want war. But therefore, it's so important to understand also what happened on 9/11, and this is still an ongoing thing. And that by ignoring the negative, it doesn't go away, it will become worse. Because now they're bringing in this Frankenstein proxy groups into Europe with the refugees it's embedded in. So something about ISIS fighters are brought into Europe. So this is part of this escalating agenda.
That's right.
And so I think it's a very good point you make, that we should keep thinking and not responding, reacting, and fall for this trap, for this deception, in order to have not this this clash of civilization coming into manifestation, full blown.
Right, right. Well, like in Sri Lanka yesterday, the heads of the Islamic community in Sri Lanka, they all condemned the attack. So this group that supposedly did the attack is unknown and has not claimed any responsibility. So it's like they're, you know, we need to understand that the real Islamic community is not the enemy.
Yeah.
But what the United States and the Western countries have done by engaging militarily in the Middle East and destroying cities and states and communities, we have created this refugee crisis. It was a given. If you're going to go into a country like Afghanistan or Iraq and bomb it back to the Stone Age, you're going to put a lot of people on the road.
With anger.
With anger.
And fear.
And fear. And so this refugee flow into Europe, they knew it was going to happen. That's part of the plan. Yeah. And by bringing so many Islamic refugees, Muslim refugees into Europe, they're creating another source of tension.
Yeah.
People that are not used to seeing Muslims are now seeing Muslims everywhere, and it's another strategy of tension. So that when they bring these people in and then they create terrorism, you know, using their name, it causes a lot of anxiety in Europeans.
And economic stress.
Yes.
People are so, yeah. So I encourage people, when we made your presentation, I put it on YouTube, I encourage people to watch it. I think it's very important also because you make these links so clearly that people go and look it and go to your website and your work, but also to reconnect in real life with people, communicate, because a lot of people are on the computer, just feeding the fear, and so that's a really good thing. Like yesterday at such a conference, it's always good to connect with people and to communicate. That also helps not to fall for this polarization and identification with certain beliefs or religious beliefs, and then the division is there.
Right.
So thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much.
Good.